Tonight on the Daily Debrief, the family of murder victim Shanann Watts opens up about her husband, the admitted killer. Plus,
it absolutely shocks their senses.
The headless corpse of a former judge buried on a golf course. His son's drug-infused defense.
Jimmy Scandirito did not kill his father.
Also, the 911 call in the case of murder on the farm. Did this son kill his mother for money? The nation's top criminal cases are on the Daily Debrief. It's Monday, March 11th. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Debrief. We have a lot to talk about tonight. First, the parents of murder victim Shanann Watts are speaking out about the moment they came to believe Chris Watts was the killer of his family. Watts is in prison after pleading guilty to murdering his wife and his daughters. He also admitted to causing the death of his unborn son. In an interview with Dr. Phil, the parents and brother of Shanann say they never knew Chris Watts could cause this much damage until they saw his eerie interviews with local media.
Was there a time before this that you recognized that Shanann was in danger?
Never. When she was in North Carolina visiting, we noticed he was being real cold. I mean...
But still, never would have thought...
But never, you know, he was too nice of a guy to just do all that damage.
When she went missing, we still didn't think he did that until we saw that interview. It was like...
When you saw the interview of him standing in the driveway, and...
I wanted to fly there immediately.
Keeping his arms crossed and swaying. And...
It was pretty clear to me that he had done something horrible at that point. You knew right then.
I knew that morning.
Well, once we knew that all the doors were locked from the inside out, the only way in or out was the garage. But we still didn't think that he would do something like that.
The mother claims she has also been visited by the spirits of the dead family. Opening statements today in the trial of a Florida son accused of murdering his father, who used to be a judge, and burying the body at a golf course. James Scandirito Jr. reported his father, James Sr., missing and made a series of inconsistent statements to police. Police caught the defendant buying duct tape, garbage bags, and cleaning supplies with his father's debit card. They also caught the defendant throwing a suitcase full of bloody clothing into a dumpster. The problem? Investigators only have the victim's torso and upper legs. They never found the head or other body parts. This is a retrial. The first case ended due to a health issue with one of the attorneys. More on the first case in a moment, but first, the state's opening statement. Here, the prosecutor describes the police dog locating the victim's remains.
You'll hear about how Tucker goes over to a shallow sand pit that has been recently covered, and he starts to paw. And when he does, he's alerting that there are human remains inside that pit. The police uncover what's underneath, and it absolutely shocks their senses. It is gruesome, it is despicable. What is inside that shallow pit are 2 garbage bags. Both have blue drawstrings. One of them has duct tape wrapped around it. In one of the garbage bags is the upper torso of a human being with the head cut off, decapitated. Both arms have also been cut off, and it is sawed halfway through, and there are organs inside. In the other bag, which is a little bit more open, there's the bottom half of the torso, from the waist down to the legs, with the bottom legs cut off as well. And it is in a state of decomposition. It has been there for a little while, and it smells, and you're going to hear about that smell.
Disgusting. Well, the prosecutor pointed to DNA, money, and the defendant's flight from the area as evidence of guilt.
You will hear that there's a lighter that's found next to the grave of his father with his DNA on it, the defendant. You'll also hear that that same day the defendant withdraws the $1,400 that he had deposited from his dad's account, and he flees to the west coast of Florida. The police search his condo and they find an eviction notice on his door. He's $5,600 late in his rent. His Comcast bill is late. His cell phone bill has been unpaid. But the police keep tracking him, and they eventually catch up to him on the west coast of Florida. While he's there in the west coast of Florida, he transfers $7,476 from his dad's Capital One account directly into his bank account. The defendant is eventually arrested in Alachua County on April 9th, and when he is, you'll hear that there are 2 different passports found with him to Brazil, one to Brazil. He has flight time itineraries. He has a contact number for a private jet company. What I want you to focus on and what I want you to think about is that the defendant is a man who is fueled by greed. He is fueled by desire to live a lifestyle that he simply cannot afford. He is the sole beneficiary of his father's estate, and though it's not that much money, it's a lot more than what the defendant has. The defendant is an individual, James Scandirito II, who did everything he possibly could to get away with murder.
Okay, during the first case, the defendant claimed his father died of natural causes and that the defendant merely chopped up the body because he didn't want the police to find his drugs. This time, the defense pushed that same theory a little bit further.
Jimmy Scandirito and his father, Skip, were, as a general concept, engaged in the sale of drugs. And Jimmy had been doing that for a number of years. Most of his business was in cash. The elder Scandirito was aware of this and sometimes would actually make trips to states like Washington and Colorado to assist with acquiring supply. Most of the neighbors who knew Skip and Terry Scandirito knew them because of the parties that they would throw at their house, where there was free-flowing alcohol, marijuana in various forms, and sometimes other drugs. And that was the environment that Jimmy grew up in the 70s. His first experimentations with marijuana, with alcohol, with cocaine, and with other drugs were in the presence of his father. That was the relationship that they had had.
The defense said the father and son's all-cash drug business would not be reflected in the son's official finances. The defense says the father randomly died after taking drugs, and the son disposed of the body again to prevent the police from finding his drugs.
He had decided that the best he could do would be to move his father's body, as he did, using the cart, to the garage, but that he would never be able to lift him into a bed, put him into a chair, lift him into a vehicle. He would never be able to do any of those things. It was not his plan to do something that is both horrifying and heartbreaking. But he was afraid. He knew all the neighbors knew he had been there the night before. He believed that his father had consumed cocaine while he was there. He knew that the neighbors would know that he had been there all night. He knew that there were surveillance cameras. And that if he told the police that his father had simply passed out on the floor, that something would likely be found out about it. And he panicked. Jimmy did something that he deeply regrets. And that is unfathomable to most individuals. However, the love that Skip Scandirito had for Jimmy and that Jimmy had for him was unconditional. All of the things that the state talks about in this case and has talked to you about here in this opening statement are things that happened after Skip Scandirito's death.
Our guests tonight on The Debrief are trial attorney Megan Bennett and forensic death examiner Joseph Scott Morgan. So, Joseph, let me start with you. Perfect person for this case. The medical examiner here had to list the victim's death as homicide by unspecified means because the body had no head. How rare is this?
It is rather rare. It does occur. I've been involved in cases where it has occurred, and sometimes that's all you're left with. You just assume that it's homicidal trauma, but what really goes to the severe nature of this is the fact that not only has this gentleman died, his body has been essentially dismembered, and this takes time, Aaron, and it takes a certain skill level and tools. And this is not something he would have just flown into. This was systematic. So if what the prosecution is alleging took place, this makes it all the more gruesome.
You've got all kind of premeditation in here, according to that theory. So, Megan, let me bring this your direction here. Are we going to believe this defense? I mean, the defense sort of pushed this thought during the first case, but they're sitting here trying to say that this victim, a former judge, has been doing drugs with his son for years, decades, since the son was young. And now he's joining his son being a drug dealer. Do we believe this?
Well, I think that the issue, if you're the defense, is that if you've got the evidence the state has proffered in their opening, you don't have much to go on. And it may be, I'm assuming that this is a charge as a capital case. I don't know if it came in as a capital case, but it may be.
They're not asking for the death penalty this time.
But it may, but they did before. It may be that this is queuing the jury up just to hang one juror. It does not seem like this is a theory that's going to get you an acquittal.
And of course, we've got the toxicology. Joseph, I know you'll have plenty to say about that when the time comes. Wish we could get into it now, but we have to move on to the next one here. Still ahead tonight, here on the Debrief, a Kansas doctor learning his sentence for overprescribing opioid medicines. Plus, the next case we're covering, a frantic 911 call. This particular defendant placed after seeing his mother dead. Was it real or was it an act? We're back inside the courtroom when we return. Welcome back, everybody. R&B singer R. Kelly is out of jail after someone paid off his child support debts. Kelly was arrested last week for failing to pay $161,000, but his legal jeopardy may be increasing. Celebrity attorney Gloria Allred is representing a man who claims to have yet another tape of R. Kelly engaged in sex acts with women who appear to be underage. But the client claims he has no clue how that tape came into his possession. Actor Jussie Smollett faces 16 new charges related to an attack prosecutors say he faked on himself. The new charges come from a grand jury indictment. Authorities believe Smollett paid two men who worked with him on the Fox show Empire to attack him, perhaps to raise his profile. Initially, Chicago prosecutors charged Smollett with falsely reporting the incident. Now a grand jury has charged him with the same exact thing 16 times over again. Each count could result in a 4-year prison sentence. The subject of the popular true crime podcast Serial will not have his second chance at legal redemption. Maryland's highest court ruled late Friday that Adnan Syed will not receive a second trial for the murder of his high school girlfriend. The court agreed that Syed's defense was deficient, but that his original legal counsel's poor representation was not enough to grant a new trial. Syed's case was profiled in the podcast Serial, which raised questions about the handling of his case. A Kansas doctor has been sentenced to life behind bars for selling opioid drugs. Dr. Stephen R. Henson of Wichita was convicted of unlawfully distributing drugs, including oxycodone, by basically selling them to people who did not need them. Federal prosecutors say one of those people died. During Henson's sentencing, the judge said he needed to send a message to doctors that illegal distribution is serious. The judge said 70,000 people died in 2017 from overdoses, more than all American deaths in the Vietnam War. Day 2 of the case of the Iowa man accused of being a seed of evil. Prosecutors say he killed his mother because his own farm was failing. Here's a look back at the basic facts.
Of Iowa is accused of murder on the farm. Prosecutors say his financial struggles led him to kill his mother for money.
A farmer puts a seed and fertilizer into the ground and then waits for Mother Nature to produce her bounty. And during that time, they sometimes have very little income coming in. So they live on their credit line. The trick is to live within your means. And we'll learn the defendant didn't do that.
The defendant himself called 911 to report finding his mother Shirley shot.
Where is your emergency?
I need an ambulance, man. It's Bill Carter. Mama's laying here on the floor. What? Where she's dead. I don't know what happened.
Prosecutors say the defendant originally resisted making the call.
That the evidence will establish that at 11:08, for some reason, the defendant called and talked to his sister. 3 minutes before he calls 911.
Shirley Carter died at the scene, and the defendant, prosecutors say, seemed to know a little too much about what had happened.
And the defendant knew, been shot with a rifle, owned by his father, during an attempted burglary, and the shooter took the rifle with him when he left.
The prosecutor thinks Carter staged an apparent burglary. Money, jewelry, and valuable prescriptions were untouched. What, then, was he after? Perhaps an inheritance.
On the day of the homicide, their business account and their personal accounts both had less than $100 in them. And the credit line, it was nearly tapped out.
The defense focused on a statement from the defendant's father.
Bill Carter says, I know what rigor mortis is. I was a butcher. She was stiff as a board, she was cold.
In other words, the state's timeline doesn't add up.
And I believe everyone who testifies will agree that if that's true, it would be impossible for Jason Carter to have been the killer. Jason was over at the house. He spent time with his mother, that his mother was proud of him, happy with him, that they were together often, and that none of them had seen friction, sadness.
Two sides to every case. Let's dial back and listen to the entire frantic 911 call placed by the defendant.
I need an ambulance, man.
Okay, to what address?
132 Perry Street. It's Bill Carter, and I'm his son. My mom was laying here on the floor. What? Where she's dead. I don't know what happened.
Okay, how old's your mother?
What?
How old is your mother, Bill?
I think she's 67.
Okay, is she inside the house or outside?
She's laying here on the kitchen floor.
Okay, and this is...
I don't know what happened.
Hey, Bill, I'm sending an ambulance to you. Let me double check the address. So 132 Perry Street in Pleasantville, correct?
It's Lacona, Iowa.
It's in Lacona?
132 Perry Street, Lacona.
Okay. Okay, Bill, what's your...
It's 2 hours. I don't get what happened. There's a hole through the floor in the refrigerator. I don't know what she was trying to... I don't get what happened.
You said there's a hole through the floor in the refrigerator?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she's snorting in a pool of blood. She's still alive. I don't get it. She's not dead.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and send the officers and deputies and the ambulance to the house there so we can help you, okay?
Okay.
They're already on the way, okay? It'll be just a moment here, okay? All right, Bill, I'm going to go ahead and let you go.
A lot of testimony today attempted to track the defendant's whereabouts the day his mother died. Authorities were not able to pinpoint his movements through cell phone records. But they did demand testimony from a woman with whom Jason Carter was having an affair about his text messages the day Shirley Carter died. The state tried to claim a gap in the messages, gave the defendant time to commit the crime. Here, though, is cross-examination.
It isn't unusual, though, to have gaps in your conversations.
No.
And was there anything unusual about the substance of your conversation on June 19th?
No.
Did you perceive in any way that Jason Carter was troubled on the morning of June 19th?
No.
Now, you said that you shared personal information. Did Jason Carter always speak positively about his mother?
Yes.
From what you could see, appeared to love his mother?
Yes.
Did you ever have any sense that he was angry or mad at his mother?
No.
In fact, would you say he was close to his parents?
Yes.
I think at one point you said the worst thing he ever said about his mother is he couldn't eat grilled cheese anymore because she made a lot of that when he grew up.
Yes.
The grilled cheese defense here. Back to Joseph Scott Morgan and Megan Bennett one last time here. So Attorney Bennett, let me ask you this. Does the state's theory hold water for this case?
The state's saying that Jason Carter killed his mother for money. He left the dad alive, however, so I don't see how the inheritance goes to Jason unless he was planning an elaborate scheme to pin this on his father. He did accuse his father, or if he was also going to shoot his father. I think that's a big question. I haven't heard the state answer it yet.
I had the same exact question here. I mean, okay, how else was there going to be money wrapped up in this? And the state's got to wrap that up because, again, usually the money would go to the surviving spouse here. Joseph Scott Morgan, same question to you. Does the state's theory in this one hold any water in your opinion?
Hard to say at this point in time. I'm very curious. I've never heard a 9/11 call like this before, Aaron. This is it kind of stopped me in my tracks when I heard it. He's not talking about his mother so much as he's really emphasizing the hole in the floor and the hole in the refrigerator and all this sort of thing. You know, I've never heard these kind of calls. It's generally people screaming, saying, "My mom is dead, my mom is dead, get here." He had a bit too much detail for my taste. I'm going to be very interested about the forensic evidence here. Can they tie together a timeline from a scientific standpoint? What did they do when they arrived at the scene? That remains to be seen.
You know, and we're back and forth on that one, Joseph. You know, we've got the state saying there's a timeline, there's a gap. He made inconsistent statements. He claimed he was working in the barn when other farmers said it was clear there was no work getting done because the parts looked like they were untouched. And then the defense says that doesn't work. So, again, a back and forth. I'll keep an open mind on this one until I hear a little bit more. Joseph Scott Morgan, Megan Bennett, great to have you on the Debrief tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debrief. I will be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern here on the Law and Crime Network with this recap of the best moments in cases nationwide, along with the day's top legal stories. Our live trial coverage begins tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning. Have a good evening, everybody. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.